Do you ever feel like you're constantly busy, just running from one thing to the next, but when you look back on your day or week, you haven't actually moved the needle on what truly matters? Maybe you find yourself saying, I just don't have time for that, and yet hours seem to just vanish into thin air. If that sounds familiar, well, welcome. Welcome to English Life Skills Hub. I'm your host.
And I'm your expert guy for today's topic.
We're here today to take a really close look at one of the most, fundamental challenges many of us face, trying to gain control over our time. It feels like the ultimate non-renewable resource, doesn't it? And yet, so many of us feel completely at its mercy. So we're going to explore how you can stop just being busy and actually start being truly productive, maybe even reclaiming significant chunks of your day.
Yeah, that feeling of being perpetually busy, but unproductive. It's incredibly common. It's something I've seen countless times in my work over the years. People are putting in the hours, they're putting in the effort, but it's like they're running on a treadmill, lots of motion, absolutely no forward progress.
And the data on this is pretty eye-opening, isn't it? When you start actually tracking how people really spend their time, the reality is often, quite different from what they think they're doing.
Absolutely. It can be confronting, definitely, but it's essential. I've seen analyses suggesting the average person wastes, get this, over 3 hours every single day.
3 hours? Wow.
Yeah, think about that, 3 hours. Across a week, that's 21 hours. Over a year, that's nearly 46 full days. Right. Just imagine having an extra 46 days each year to, dedicate to your most important goals or your relationships, your well-being.
Okay, so where is all this time actually going? What are the usual suspects, the common culprits you see when people start shining a light on their daily habits?
Well, it tends to show up in pretty predictable patterns, actually.
Yeah.
Scrolling through social media, that can easily eat up 2.5 hours.
2.5? Just scrolling.
Easily. And then maybe some casual TV watching. That might take another hour and a half. Then you've got the smaller, but still significant chunks. Maybe 45 minutes in meetings that, frankly, lack clear purpose or outcome.
About 30 minutes just looking for misplaced items, keys, files, whatever.
Yeah.
And easily 25 minutes just handling emails inefficiently, like constantly checking and rechecking.
Just adding those few things up, that's well over 5 hours right there. And yet the story we tell ourselves is always, I'm just too busy.
That's exactly the heart of the problem, this confusion between motion and actual progress. I often call this the busy trap.
Yeah.
You're in constant activity, you're reacting to everything, checking every notification, trying to juggle multiple tasks, but you're not, strategically advancing towards your real objectives. You feel busy because you're constantly moving, but you're not being effective.
So it sounds like the very first step, maybe a bit painful but necessary, is just figuring out where the time is actually going.
Exactly. It all starts with awareness. You simply can't manage what you don't measure. Once people start tracking, even just for a few days, the patterns become really clear, and they start to see the main ways time is just slipping through their fingers. And what are those main categories, those sort of big buckets of time wasters you tend to see pop up again and again?
Well, based on my observations, I'd group them into 3 main areas.
Yeah.
The first one is what I call phantom time.
Phantom time.
Yeah, it's like the mysterious disappearance of hours. Often it's into the digital void. Endless scrolling, mindlessly browsing websites, falling down those online rabbit holes. You start with just a quick check, maybe on your phone, and suddenly an hour is gone, and you have no real clear memory of how you even spent it.
I think we can all relate to that one.
Oh, definitely. The second category is pseudo-productivity. These are activities that feel like work, or they feel important, maybe necessary, but they don't actually contribute to your significant goals or create any real value.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, it could be endlessly perfecting something that's already perfectly good enough, or attending meetings that aren't really essential for you to be at, or maybe spending hours researching something without ever taking concrete action based on that research. It gives you the illusion of progress.
Got it. Busy work, basically.
Kind of, yeah. And the third one is interruption addiction. We live in this hyper-connected world, right? It constantly demands our attention. Notifications pinging, emails arriving every few minutes, colleagues dropping by. This constant switching between tasks is just incredibly damaging to focus and productivity. I've seen figures showing the average knowledge worker checks email as often as every 6 minutes.
Every 6 minutes? Seriously?
Yeah. And here's the kicker. It takes, on average, about 23 minutes to regain deep focus after you've been interrupted.
Wow, 23 minutes just to get back on track. So if you're interrupted every 6 minutes, you're basically never properly on track.
Precisely. You end up living in a constant state of shadow work, just reacting instead of actually creating or thinking deeply.
Okay, so that paints a pretty clear picture of the problem. Once we've done that, maybe slightly painful, time audit, and identified these patterns, the phantom time, the pseudo stuff, the interruptions, what are some actual strategies we can use? How do we fight back? Let's start with phantom time, that mysterious disappearance of hours.
Right. So the solution really starts with that conscious awareness we talked about, and then it's about setting boundaries. It sounds almost too simple, maybe even trivial, but one of the most powerful things I often recommend is physically separating yourself from the main source of that phantom time, which is usually the smartphone. Just try putting your phone in another room for a set period each day. Maybe just start with 2 hours. See what happens.
Ooh, I can imagine that feels uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? Like a little bit of anxiety might creep in.
It absolutely does. There can be a real sense of withdrawal, like you're missing something. But if you push through that initial discomfort, what you discover is this quiet space for clear thinking and focused work that just wasn't possible before. You're basically reclaiming your cognitive space.
Okay, that makes sense. How about pseudo-productivity then? How do we stop doing all those things that feel busy but aren't actually getting us anywhere important?
Yeah, this one needs a really strong filter. I often encourage people to use what I sometimes call the deathbed test.
The deathbed test sounds a bit morbid.
Maybe a little, but it's effective. Ask yourself, when you're looking back on your life, will this specific activity you're doing right now have truly mattered? Will it genuinely contribute to your long-term goals or your values or your relationships? If the answer is a pretty clear no, it's very likely pseudo-productivity.
Okay, that's a sharp filter.
Beyond that filter, it's about embracing the concept of good enough. Seriously, fissy pit. For most tasks, 80% perfect is often perfectly sufficient. Spending that last 20% of your time chasing absolute perfection often yields really minimal additional value, but consumes a disproportionate amount of time. I remember working with this blogger once. She'd spend like 8 hours crafting a single post, trying to make it absolutely flawless. We shifted her approach to what we call the first draft rule. Basically, 90 minutes to write it, 30 minutes to edit it, then publish.
And what happened?
Her output tripled. She went from 1 post a week to 3. And because she was publishing more consistently, her reader engagement actually increased. Good enough delivered results faster and ultimately more effectively.
That's a great example of how perfectionism can actually hold you back. Okay, now tackling that third one, interruption, addiction, the constant pings, the demands on our attention.
Right. The key here really comes down to batch processing and, importantly, setting expectations. So instead of reacting to every single email the moment it arrives, designate specific times to check and respond, maybe something like 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 5 p.m. That's it. And turn off all those non-essential notifications on your phone and your computer. You need to kind of train people around you, and yourself too, that you are not constantly available 24/7. That's a really dramatic example of this with a software developer I worked with. He was constantly being pulled aside or messaged by colleagues, just couldn't get anything done. So we implemented focus blocks, specific times where he put on noise-canceling headphones and literally put a do not disturb sign on his monitor.
Like a physical sign.
Yep. And he communicated these times clearly to his team. The result, his coding productivity during those blocks jumped by 300%. It's all about creating that uninterrupted time for deep, focused work.
That leads us nicely to something I think many people find incredibly difficult, which is just saying no. How does mastering the art of saying no actually free up time?
Oh, saying no is arguably the most fundamental time management skill there is. Think about it. Every single time you say yes to something, you are inherently saying no to something else. And usually that's something else to something potentially more important to you or your actual goals. People overcommit, often because they fear disappointing others, right? But in doing so, they end up disappointing themselves by neglecting their own priorities. I worked with an executive once who was just drowning in meetings, attending over 40 a week. It was unsustainable.
40 meetings a week. Wow.
Yeah, so we started challenging each invitation with a simple question. Okay, what actually happens if I don't attend this meeting? What we found was fascinating. In about 70% of those cases, the meeting went on perfectly fine without him, and nothing critical was missed. He managed to cut his meeting load down to around a dozen truly essential ones per week. That freed up dozens of hours, literally.
Okay, but how do you say no without, damaging relationships or coming across as unhelpful? That's the tricky part.
Absolutely. I teach a technique I call the graceful no. Basically, it's 3 parts. First, you acknowledge the request and the person's need. Hey, I really appreciate you thinking of me for this project. Second, you clearly state your constraint. Right now, though, I'm really deeply focused on finishing Project X, and it has a super tight deadline. And third, if possible, you offer an alternative. However, maybe I could help out with Y next month, or have you considered asking Sarah? She actually has great expertise in that specific area. It shows respect for the asker while still protecting your own time and focus.
That's practical. I like that. Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit. You mentioned earlier that managing time is kind of impossible because it's fixed, but managing energy is really key. Can you expand on that idea?
Yeah.
Exactly. Time is constant, right? We all get the same 24 hours. But our energy, that fluctuates wildly throughout the day based on loads of factors: sleep, food, stress, focus. Trying to force yourself to do really demanding cognitive work when your mental energy is at its absolute lowest ebbs, it's incredibly inefficient. It's like trying to run a marathon on an empty tank.
Right.
So I tend to focus on four main types of energy. There's physical energy, that's your sleep, nutrition, exercise. Then emotional energy, managing stress, having positive relationships. Mental energy, your focus, your cognitive capacity. And finally, spiritual energy, which is more about alignment with your values and your sense of purpose. When any of these are depleted, your ability to use your time effectively just plummets.
Okay, so understanding the types of energy is one thing, but how do you actually align your work with your energy levels day to day?
Well, a good start is simply tracking your energy. Just for a week, maybe note down hourly how you're feeling. Are you alert, focused, creative, or kind of drained? Most people find they have maybe 2-3 peak hours of mental energy, often in the morning, though not always. The trick is to schedule your most important, most brain-intensive tasks during those peak energy times. Save the email, the admin tasks, the less demanding work for those periods when your energy is naturally lower. Work with your energy rhythms, not against them.
Let's talk about another challenge that ties into both time and energy: procrastination. People often feel really guilty about it, but it seems more complex than just being lazy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Procrastination is very rarely a time management problem at its core. It's almost always an emotional management problem. We put off tasks that make us feel things we don't like, maybe overwhelmed, anxious, bored, insecure, or frustrated. So avoiding the task is like a temporary mood repair strategy. It makes us feel a bit better in the short term, but obviously much worse in the long run when the deadline looms or the task is still there.
So how do you tackle that if it's emotional?
Well, the strategies then need to focus on managing those difficult emotions. The 2-minute rule is great for overcoming inertia, basically. If a task takes less than 2 minutes, just do it immediately. Don't even think about it. For bigger, more daunting tasks, something like the Swiss cheese method can help just poke some small holes in it. Or break it down into ridiculously small micro-tasks. Do the very first tiny step. Often, just starting is the hardest part. And once you start, momentum can build.
Yeah, getting started is often half the battle. And speaking of energy and avoiding burnout, rest seems crucial, doesn't it? But it often feels like the first thing to go when you're busy, like it's a luxury.
It feels counterintuitive, I know. But rest is truly the foundation of sustained productivity, not the enemy of it. Your brain, your body, they absolutely need downtime to consolidate information, recharge batteries, and maintain creative capacity. Just pushing through constantly without rest. It leads to decreased quality of work, more errors, and eventually just burnout.
So what does effective rest look like? Is it scrolling social media?
Definitely not. Effective rest means truly disconnecting. It's genuine downtime. I'm a big fan of working in focus bursts, followed by short breaks. You might have heard of the Pomodoro technique or something similar, like a 90-minute cycle. Maybe 90 minutes of intense focus, then a full 15-20 minutes of a complete break away from the screen, maybe walk around, and honestly taking one full, genuinely work-free day each week. I see that as non-negotiable for long-term effectiveness and well-being.
Okay, that makes sense. How does having really clear goals play into all of this time and energy management?
Goals are your absolute North Star for all of this. Without clear goals, you can't effectively apply any of these techniques because you simply don't know what activities are important versus unimportant. It's like you can become incredibly efficient at climbing a ladder, but if the ladder's leaning against the wrong wall because you didn't have a goal, well, it's wasted effort. Using a framework like SMART-R goals that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and regularly reviewed helps make your goals really concrete and actionable. Then, your weekly planning and your daily planning become about directly aligning your actions with those bigger long-term goals. I also find the rule of 3 really powerful. Try to focus on a maximum of 3 major goals at any one time. It helps maintain focus and stops you from spreading yourself too thin.
You touched on this earlier, but could you just reiterate that distinction between efficiency and effectiveness? Why is focusing on effectiveness more critical?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest mistake I see people making. They get really focused on doing things right, that's efficiency, instead of focusing on doing the right things, which is effectiveness. You can perfectly organize an utterly unnecessary meeting,
Yeah.
or you can quickly respond to every single trivial email that comes in, or you can efficiently polish a document that ultimately won't move your project forward 1 inch. In all those cases, you're being efficient, sure, but you're being completely ineffective in terms of your overall goals and what actually matters.
So how do you stay focused on effectiveness?
Regular reflection is key. Maybe weekly. Ask yourself, okay, looking back, what activities this past week truly moved me closer to my most important goals? Monthly, look for bigger patterns. Annually, really step back and ask the tough question. Am I spending my limited, non-renewable time on what truly, deeply matters to me?
That constant check-in sounds vital. And speaking of practical things that just eat time, disorganization can be a huge drain too, right? Just looking for stuff.
Oh, absolutely huge. I've seen stats suggesting people spend, on average, something like 12 minutes every day just looking for misplaced items, keys, documents, digital files. That adds up. It's over 70 hours a year. It's pure wasted time, and it adds this unnecessary mental load and frustration too.
So what's the fix for that?
The solution is actually pretty simple in concept, though implementing it takes discipline. It's the old adage, everything has a home and everything goes home. Designate a specific place for everything you own and use regularly, both physical stuff and digital stuff. A consistent, logical folder structure on your computer is just as important as having a hook for your keys. And maybe spend just 5 or 10 minutes tidying up at the end of each day, putting things back in their homes. It maintains order and saves you so much time in the long run.
Okay, wow. So summing all this up, we've talked about identifying where time actually goes, battling things like phantom time, pseudo-productivity, interruption addiction. We've covered the power of saying no, managing energy, not just time, tackling procrastination, the real importance of rest, aligning everything with clear goals, and staying organized. That's a lot. For someone listening who's feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed by all this, where should they even begin?
That's a great question. Start small. Please don't try to implement everything all at once. That's a recipe for overwhelm and giving up. Just pick one area, one strategy that resonated most with you today. Maybe it's just tracking your time honestly for 1 week. Or maybe it's trying that graceful no technique the next time you're asked to do something you don't have capacity for. Or maybe it's as simple as putting your phone in another room for just 1 hour tomorrow. Commit to just that one small change, maybe for 30 days. Small, consistent steps are what build momentum. They lead to significant compounding results over time. Don't underestimate the power of tiny changes.
That's really great advice. It makes it feel much more manageable, less daunting.
Yeah, and ultimately it all comes back to that fundamental truth we started with. Time is finite. It's non-renewable. How you spend your time is, quite literally, how you spend your life. So these aren't just, productivity hacks. They're really tools for more intentional living. They help give you back control so you can consciously choose how you invest that precious resource.
That's a really powerful thought to leave everyone with. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. The difference really is in how you choose to use them. This has been a fantastic exploration into reclaiming your most valuable asset, your time. If today's conversation resonated with you, maybe here's a little challenge. Pick just one strategy we discussed, seriously, just one, and commit to trying it consistently for the next week. See what happens, notice the impact. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. We really appreciate you being part of English Life Skills Hub. If you found this helpful, please do share it with someone else who might benefit from hearing it. And of course, make sure you're following or subscribing wherever you listen so you don't miss our next exploration. Find us on all socials under English Life Skills Hub. Leave a comment. Let us know what strategy you're going to try. Until next time, be intentional with your time.